The night my cousin thought he was being clever, I learned something about the people you've known your whole life. Some of them have never actually seen you. They've only seen what they decided you were. My name is Joel. I'm 31. I work in supply chain management for a mid-sized logistics company out of Mississauga, and up until about 2 years ago, I was the guy at every family gathering who got introduced as still figuring things out. Not because I was lost, because I wasn't married. In my family, those two things are apparently the same. My cousin Dex has always been the one who thinks he's running the room. He's the kind of guy who calls himself a connector, who sends LinkedIn requests to people he met once at a Tim Hortons. He's not a bad person, exactly. He's just never learned the difference between helping someone and making himself feel useful at their expense. So when he texted me in February saying he was having a small dinner at his place in Oakville and that I should come, that there was someone he wanted me to meet, I should have known. I almost said no. I had a hockey game to watch. The Leafs were playing Tampa, and I had already committed emotionally to that loss, but Dex said it was casual. Just a few people. Nothing weird. I have since retired the phrase "nothing weird" from my vocabulary entirely. The drive out took about 40 minutes. His neighborhood is the kind where the houses all look slightly embarrassed about how large they are. I parked behind a Range Rover I didn't recognize and stood on the front step for a second, too long before knocking. Dex answered with the smile he saves for when he thinks he's done something impressive. "You made it," he said, like I'd crossed a desert. "You said 7. Come in, come in." The living room had 6 people in it, arranged across couches and chairs with drinks in their hands, and the particular energy of people who have been waiting for something to happen. Dex's wife, Tamara, was over by the kitchen island. 2 of their friends, couples I had met at their wedding. A guy named Glenn who I vaguely remembered from a Christmas party. And, sitting slightly apart from the rest on the end of the couch, a woman I had never seen before. She was looking at her phone when I walked in. She looked up at the sound of the door, and for a second our eyes met across the room before either of us had context for the other. She was around my age. Black hair pulled back loosely. A burgundy sweater. She was a bigger woman, what some people would call plus size, and she wore it without apology, which I noticed because so many people don't. What I noticed more was the expression on her face when she clocked the room's energy. It was the same thing I was noticing, the slightly too wide smiles. Tamara suddenly finding something to do with a dish towel. Glenn leaning back in his chair with the satisfied posture of a man who had paid for a ticket. I looked at Dex. He gave me the game show host gesture toward the couch. "Joel, this is Hadley." "Hadley, Joel." Hadley put her phone face down on the cushion beside her. Hi, I said. Then Dex added, with the timing of someone who had rehearsed this, "We thought you two might really hit it off." The room went just slightly too quiet. There it was. I stood there for half a second, looking at a woman who had done nothing wrong except show up to a dinner she was also told would be casual, and I thought about what the expected reaction was supposed to be. Discomfort. An awkward laugh. Maybe a visible hesitation that gave everyone something to discuss later. I pulled out the other end of the couch and sat down. "Good," I said. I was starting to think I'd have to spend the whole night listening to Glenn explain crypto again. Glenn made a noise. A couple of people laughed, nervous and surprised. Hadley's expression shifted, just slightly. One corner of her mouth, like she was deciding whether or not to let it through. Dex blinked. "Jumping right in." "You ambushed me with a social experiment," I said. "Aggressive feels appropriate." Tamara laughed a little too fast and disappeared into the kitchen. Hadley picked up her drink. "For the record, I was also told this was a normal dinner." I turned to her. "So we were both set up apparently. How long have you known?" She considered this. "Since I walked in, and Tamara smiled at me like I was a charity case she was proud of. That was sharp and accurate. I respected it immediately. Strong opening line," I said. "I've had practice." For the next 20 minutes, the room tried to be normal and failed. Conversations kept drifting toward us and then correcting away, like everyone was circling a thing they wanted to see but didn't want to be caught watching. Hadley handled it better than any of them deserved. She worked as a pediatric occupational therapist at a clinic in Burlington. She had once spent 3 hours on hold with a provincial health office only to be told the form she needed didn't exist in the system yet. She had a theory that every bad situation in Ontario could be traced back to a form that didn't exist in the system yet. That's not a theory, I said. That's just how things work here. I know, she said. That's what makes it a good theory. I laughed for real, not the polite version. The version that made Dex glance over from across the room with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then Glenn leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and said, "So Joel, honestly, is Hadley your type?" The room stopped. I felt it, that collective intake, the stillness of people who have been waiting for exactly this moment. Glenn grinning, Dex looking away. Tamara frozen in the kitchen doorway, and I saw Hadley go very still beside me. Not devastated, just braced. The posture of someone who has heard variations of this question before and already knows what it costs them either way. I set my drink down slowly. "No," I said. The room exhaled, thinking that was the whole answer. She's more interesting than anyone I usually get the chance to sit beside. Nobody moved. Glenn's grin flattened. I looked back at Hadley. She was looking at the floor, and her jaw had shifted like she was deciding something. I kept going, not performing, just making sure she could actually hear me. So if you're asking whether I usually get set up with someone this sharp, the answer is no. That's not a complaint. Silence. Then I turned back to Glenn, and if you were angling for something else, I said quietly. Don't. Dex cleared his throat. Tamara went back to her dish towel. Glenn picked up his beer and became very interested in the label. Hadley exhaled slowly. It was the smallest sound. Then she said, "Well, that was something? Good something or bad something?" I asked. She looked at me sideways, still deciding. I picked up my drink. Fair enough. And then for the first time all night, the room stopped feeling like something I was being watched inside of. The next hour and a half moved differently. Once Glenn's question had landed and died with no drama to feed on, the table lost its appetite for it. People shifted back into their own conversations. Tamara brought out the food. Butter chicken from a place on Lakeshore, garlic naan, a lentil dish that was genuinely excellent, and for a while things almost felt like what Dex had promised. Almost. But the difference was that I stopped noticing the room and started noticing Hadley. She was funny in the specific, unexpected way that only shows up in people who've spent a lot of time listening. She described her clients, never by name, always by detail, with this mixture of real frustration and real affection that made me understand she actually loved her job, even on the days she clearly didn't. One kid who would only cooperate if you called the therapy putty dragon slime. One 7-year-old who had informed her very seriously that her lanyard was unprofessional because it had penguins on it. One teenager who refused every activity until Hadley let her choose the playlist, at which point she completed 3 months of progress in 6 weeks. "What was on the playlist?" I asked. "Mitski and Old Taylor Swift," she said. "I now know every word to both." "Did that change your life?" She thought about it. "It gave me feelings about it." I laughed again. Dex looked over again. I ignored him again. Then he leaned in. "You two look cozy," he said, with the satisfied smile of someone who wanted credit. Hadley looked at him. "Was that not the plan?" His smile went slightly wrong. "Well, sure, You just thought we'd be more awkward about it," I said. He opened his mouth. "You invited us like people and watched us like a bit," I said. Not angry. Just clear. There's a difference. He didn't have a response to that. He picked up his fork and moved some rice around his plate. Hadley glanced at me. I could see her deciding whether to say something. She chose not to, but the look she gave me was a whole sentence. After dinner, people started gravitating toward the living room. Coats came off pegs. Someone mentioned the game. Hadley excused herself, and I watched her slip out through the sliding door to the back deck. I gave it 2 minutes. When I went outside, she was standing at the railing with her arms folded, looking at the backyard. The February air was cold enough to see your breath. The string lights Tamara had put up along the fence were doing their best. Hadley didn't look surprised when I came out. "You okay?" I asked. "That question has gotten a lot of mileage tonight." "That's not an answer." She was quiet for a second. "I knew what dinner was before the appetizers. I figured. I almost left when Dex did that introduction thing." She looked at the fence, the game show voice. "Yeah, but I didn't." "Why not?" She turned her head slightly without fully looking at me. "You sat down." Something landed in my chest. Not dramatically. Just quietly, the way things do when they're actually true. "I thought," she continued, If you made a face or said something, I'd finish my water and call it a night and you said something about Glenn and crypto. I smiled a little. Hard to go wrong there. She almost smiled back. Then she looked at the yard again. I've been in rooms like that before, where people set you up to watch what happens. You learn to feel it the second you walk in. She paused. What changes is whether anyone else in the room feels it too. I leaned on the railing beside her. For what it's worth, I felt it. I know, she said. That's the part I'm still figuring out what to do with. The door slid open behind us. Dex stepped out with his jacket half on, the face of a man who knew he owed something and was hoping the cold air would satisfy it. Hey, he said. Can I grab you for a sec, Joel? Hadley started to move. I can give you. No, I said. Stay. Dex's expression went complicated. He pulled his jacket the rest of the way on, rubbed the back of his neck, did the full inventory of things men do when they're working up to something they should have done 20 minutes ago. Look, he said. I didn't mean for it to get weird. Hadley let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Dex glanced at her. I really did think you'd hit it off. Maybe I made it into more of a thing than it needed to be. You made it into a spectacle, I said. There's a difference between introducing two people and putting them in the middle of a table and waiting for something to happen. He looked at his shoes. Hadley took a breath. I don't need anyone to be sorry, she said. I just need people to think, even for a second, about what they're actually doing when they think they're helping. Dex looked at her for a long moment. You're right, he said. I'm sorry, Hadley. She nodded. Okay. Not effusive, not performed, just okay. I heard the boundary in it, that this was accepted but not erased, and that was her call to make. Dex went back inside. The deck was quiet again. Our breath made small clouds in the cold. Hadley looked at the string lights for a while, then she said, I had a whole thing, G. A thing? For the table. If Glenn had kept going, I had it mapped out. She smiled a little. Fairly devastating. What happened to it? You happened to it, sorry. No, you're not. No, I admitted. I'm really not, she laughed then. A real one. Warm enough that a light came on in the neighbor's window, which felt appropriate. So, she said, for the record. She turned slightly toward me. I looked at her. Good. Definitely good. Her smile came slowly. Okay then. A car appeared at the end of the driveway. Hadley glanced at it. That's my cousin, she said. I carpooled. Smart. Keeps the exit clean. Always. She tucked her hands into her coat pockets, looked at me one more time. Thank you for the Glenn thing, for not making the night what they wanted it to be. You don't have to thank me for being a regular person. I know, she said, but I can thank you for being a decent one. She went down the deck steps and across the driveway. I watched the car pull away, then went back inside, where Dex was refilling his drink with the posture of a man in quiet penance. I didn't say anything to him that night. I just got my jacket and drove back to Mississauga with the heat on and the radio off, thinking about a woman who had walked into a room that was set up to make her small and had somehow made everyone else in it smaller instead. I texted her 2 days later. She had given me her number on a receipt she found in her coat pocket, pressed it into my hand on the deck while Dex was still apologizing, and said, in case you want to have a normal conversation sometime. I typed, this is Joel, the Glenn deterrent. She replied in 4 minutes. I was wondering when you'd use that. We met on a Saturday at the Dundas Valley Conservation Area, her idea. She showed up in a green parka and hiking boots that had clearly seen actual trails, which I respected because mine were aspirational at best. It was cold, properly cold, the kind of February cold that Ontario does with commitment, but she had a thermos of coffee and a very practical attitude about weather that I found immediately appealing. Ground rules, she said, as we reached the trailhead. This already feels like a better structure than our first meeting. I judge people by whether they complain about the cold in the first 10 minutes. And if they do, I think less of them. That seems harsh. It's generous, she said. I used to give them 20. We walked for almost 2 hours. The trail was quiet, mostly empty, the trees stripped down and honest the way they get in winter. She asked questions the way I'd noticed in Dex's dining room, ones that opened things up without pushing. She wanted to know how I'd ended up in logistics, whether I actually liked it, what it looked like, when work felt meaningful versus when it just paid the bills. I told her the truth, which was that it was mostly the second thing, but that I was good at it, and goodness at something Wasn't nothing. She told me she'd almost become an architect. What happened? I interned and realized I cared more about the people inside the buildings than the buildings themselves. That's actually a beautiful pivot. It took me 2 years and a failed first year of grad school to call it a pivot, she said. At the time, it was just expensive confusion. I liked that, the honesty of it, the way she talked about her own detours without either shame or performance. Around the halfway point, we stopped at an overlook. The valley below was gray and white and still, the kind of scene that makes Ontario look like it has something to say. Hadley wrapped both hands around her thermos and said, "Can I ask you something direct? Given how we met, I think we're past building up to it." She smiled, then got serious. "Did you feel like you had to step in?" At dinner. I'd thought about this on the drive over. About what the honest answer was versus what sounded good. "No," I said. "I felt like Glenn was trying to make you the setup for a joke I didn't find funny." "That's different." She looked out at the valley. "And if I'd handled it myself, I would have enjoyed watching it land." She laughed, short and bright, and it scattered into the cold air. Then she got quiet again. "I've been doing this since I was a teenager," she said. "Walking into rooms and clocking exactly how much space I'm allowed to take up before someone makes a comment. It's exhausting to have to be that aware all the time." She paused. "So when you just sat down, like it wasn't a decision, like the whole room's anticipation was just background noise." She looked at me. "That mattered to me. I didn't rush into it. You were the most interesting person in that room before I said a word," I said. "I was just the one paying attention." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're going to have to stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Being precise at exactly the wrong moment for my composure." I smiled. "I'll work on it." We turned back toward the parking lot. At some point, without either of us noting it, she tucked her arm through mine because the path had gotten slippery. Neither of us moved apart when the path flattened out again. That was how it started. Not a dramatic declaration. Just two people walking a winter trail arm in arm because it made sense, and neither of us had a reason to stop. The second date was in Hamilton, her choice. A small gallery on James Street North that was running a show by an Indigenous artist she'd been following for 2 years. I knew almost nothing about visual art. I told her that walking in. "Perfect," she said. "No bad opinions to unlearn." She moved through the show differently than I expected. Not explaining things to me, just occasionally stopping and saying something like, "Look at the negative space here," or "See how he's using color as geography," and then letting me sit with it without asking what I thought. It was the most thoughtful way I had ever been taught anything. Afterward, we went for ramen at a place on Concession Street. She had pulled pork. I had something with a soft-boiled egg that I ordered purely on description and was rewarded appropriately. Halfway through the meal, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her expression shifted, just enough that I noticed. "What?" She turned the screen slightly so I could see. "A text from Tamara. Heard you and Joel are actually a thing. So happy it worked out. We knew you two would be perfect." Hadley set the phone face down. "They want credit," I said. "They want to feel like matchmakers." She stared at her ramen, like it was a good thing they did. "It wasn't," I said. "What they did was use you to see what would happen. You know that." She looked up at me. "I know. The thing worth keeping," I said, "is ours. What happened on the deck? The trail last weekend. Tonight. That's not theirs." She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "Do you want to come over after? I make terrible tea and I have strong opinions about Canadian television, and I'm not ready for tonight to be over." The terrible tea sounds like a warning. It is. I'll come anyway. Her apartment was in a low-rise building in the East End of Hamilton, third floor, corner unit. The moment I walked in, I understood something about her that I hadn't been able to access until then. There were framed prints on the walls, local artists, a few pieces that looked like they might have come from her client's work, mounted carefully and at eye level. A bookshelf that was sorted by color, which she caught me noticing. "Before you say anything," I wasn't going to say anything. "You were going to say something. I was going to say it's easier to find things." She looked at me. "No, you weren't." "No," I admitted. "I wasn't." She made the tea. She was right. It was terrible. Some kind of rooibos blend that tasted like ambition. We sat on opposite ends of her couch with our mugs and talked about nothing important for a long time, which is the thing people underrate about early relationships. The good ones have nothing conversations that feel like everything. At some point, she got quiet, not withdrawn, thoughtful. The thing about being made into a spectacle, she said, is that you spend so much energy not reacting, keeping your face calm, not giving anyone the satisfaction. She turned her mug, and then someone sees through it anyway, and you don't know whether to feel relieved or exposed. Which was it? I asked. With me, both, she said, for a while. And now? She looked at me. Now it's just relieved. I set my mug on the coffee table. You don't have to be careful with me, Hadley. Something moved across her face. Not tears exactly, just the proximity of them. She looked at the ceiling for a second, then back at me and smiled. That's the most terrifying thing anyone has said to me in years, she said. I know. Give me a minute. Take it. She did. And then she slid across the couch and kissed me, which I had not planned for, and also had completely seen coming, which is the particular contradiction of something that's been building honestly. When we pulled apart, she kept her forehead against mine for a moment. I had a timeline, she said, for kissing me, for not kissing you until at least the third date. This is our second. I know, she said, you're a bad influence. I'll work on it. Please don't. Dex apologized properly 3 weeks later. Not by text. In person, at a coffee shop on Kerr Street in Oakville, where he sat across from me with his hands around a large dark roast and the expression of someone who had been thinking about something for a while. I set you both up like a bit, he said. Like it was going to be entertaining. And that was a shitty thing to do, especially to someone I just met. He looked up. I'm going to apologize to Hadley too, directly. Good, I said. Is she going to accept it? You'll have to ask her. He did. Hadley met him for 20 minutes at a cafe in Burlington without me, because that was her call to make. She texted me afterward. He apologized. It was genuine. I told him accepted, not forgotten. I stared at that phrase for a while. Then I understood why I was falling for her. She didn't sand down the difficult parts to make other people comfortable. She just decided which ones were hers to carry and which ones she was done with. That was a different thing entirely, and it was harder and more honest than anything I'd managed myself. 6 months later, I drove to Hamilton on a Thursday night because she'd had a brutal week. A funding decision had delayed services for 3 of her clients, and she'd spent 2 days writing appeals that she wasn't sure would be read. And I showed up at her door with ramen from the place on concession and absolutely nothing useful to say. She looked at me in the doorway. You didn't have to drive out. The ramen was going to get cold if I didn't. She stood back to let me in. We ate on her couch and she talked about the week, and I listened and didn't try to fix anything because some weeks don't want to be fixed, they just want to be witnessed. Somewhere around 9 o'clock, she fell asleep against my shoulder with the television on, and I sat there for a long time in the corner unit on the 3rd floor, watching the city lights outside her window, thinking that this was what I had been vaguely looking for without knowing the shape of it. Not someone who completed my sentences. Someone who sat with me in the incomplete ones. A year in, she came with me to my family's Thanksgiving at my parents' place in Guelph, which is its own kind of courage, because my family asks questions the way other families do renovation projects, loudly, without a plan, and with too many people involved. My aunt asked if she was planning to lose weight before the wedding. Hadley looked at her calmly and said, We haven't set a date yet, but I'll let you know when your opinion becomes relevant. The table went quiet. My mother laughed, genuinely. Then she said, I like her. To nobody in particular. I looked at Hadley. She was already looking back at me. I mouthed, Thank you. She mouthed, Standards. On a Sunday morning in March, about 18 months after that dinner in Oakville, I woke up in her apartment and lay there for a while listening to her make coffee in the kitchen. The specific sound of her moving around in a space that had become half mine without either of us formally announcing it. Her thermos, my French press, one shelf in the bathroom that had become my shelf without discussion. I thought about Dex's dining room, about Glenn leaning back in his chair like he'd paid for a show, about Hadley going very still on that couch, braced for something she'd been braced for too many times before. And I thought about how the smallest moment of that night, just pulling out a chair and sitting down, had turned out to be the truest thing I'd done in years. She appeared in the bedroom doorway with 2 mugs. You're staring at the ceiling, she said. I'm thinking. About? How much I owe Glenn a thank you note. She laughed and handed me the coffee and climbed back into bed beside me, and the morning light came through the window the way it does in March in Ontario, pale and unhurried, and full of the quiet promise that winter is almost done. That's the version of the story I never get tired of telling. Not the dinner, not Glenn's question or Dex's apology, or any of the moments where I got to be the one who said the right thing. Just this, a Sunday morning, a French press, a shelf in the bathroom that's mine. The people who set us up thought they were watching something. They were, just not what they expected. Have you ever been in a room where someone had already decided what you were before you said a word? And has anyone ever looked past that before you even had to ask them to? Tell me about it in the comments. And if this one meant something to you, leave a like. It helps more than you know. I'll see you in the next one.